Welcome, chosen ones. You didn't stumble here by accident. This moment was carved out for you. You're not just surviving what was meant to break you, you're walking proof that divine protection is real, active, and unshakable. You are not ordinary. You are not random. You are marked, sealed, and watched over in ways your enemies will never understand. They threw darts. They launched whispers. They tried to tear you down with crooked hands and poisoned tongues. But none of it worked. And now, they're scrambling, confused, imploding, because you're still standing, glowing, and thriving in a grace they cannot duplicate or disrupt. You were never the weak link. You were the test, the mirror, the untouchable one, in a circle full of chaos. So don't just sit back. Own it. Your existence is disruptive. Your resilience is legendary. And the way heaven has your back, unmatched. Let this be your reminder. You are the exception to every trap, and the evidence that divine covering is undefeated. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. When those cloaked in unseen favor walk through storms untouched, it's not chance, it's design. Opposition doesn't simply lose, it implodes. Aggressors, driven by their own ambition, unknowingly trigger their own collapse. It's not superstition, it's structure. The collapse of their plans isn't a coincidence, but the result of meddling with something outside their jurisdiction. They misread what looks like vulnerability and forge alliances fueled by overconfidence, only to watch them crumble into suspicion, betrayal, and chaos. While the protected one walks forward, the opposition combusts from within, undone not by resistance, but by the quiet force that renders their hostility harmless and turns their unity into ash. Misinterpretation of patience often writes the prologue of self-destruction. The absence of retaliation is not an invitation, it's a silence filled with consequence. Restraint is taken as submission, and calmness is mistaken for permission. They build strategies with bravado, unaware that the silence they misjudge is a lens capturing their every move. The further they go, the deeper they trap themselves in their own design. Blueprints of sabotage scatter as nothing aligns, and what they thought was an open field reveals itself to be a maze with no exit. They begin to cannibalize their own plans, drowning in confusion as the invisible shelter encasing their target denies them access. This is not luck, it's preservation. The strikes never land, not due to lack of force, but because they meet an unseen wall that erases impact before it ever touches flesh. Step beyond the screen, join, and help light the way for others. The unraveling doesn't come with a bang, but a whisper. As attempts grow futile, tension spills over. No longer able to direct their aggression outward, they turn inward. Tension ferments into suspicion, and alliances disintegrate into power struggles. Conversations shift from strategy to blame. The target remains untouched, not by counterattack, but by absence of engagement. The real fracture emerges in the silence between enemies, where trust once hid. The collapse doesn't come from defeat. It erupts from the inside, a storm of their own making. What began as a united charge dissolves into a contest of egos, each one frantically searching for someone else to hold accountable for the failure that none of them saw coming. There are those who don't see others as people. They see them as offerings, as symbols to break apart in order to feel whole again. They crave emotional dominance, psychological control, and spiritual satisfaction, and to them, draining someone is not just spite, it's strategy. It's how they crown themselves king in a castle built on another's collapse. In their blueprint, someone else's suffering is their currency, and the one they choose becomes the emotional vault they plan to rob. But when that extraction fails, when the intended collapse never comes, it sends shockwaves through their plans. The ritualized destruction they expected is denied at its core. The circle they form tightens, but instead of power, they find confusion. They expected to witness ruin, and instead meet resistance they cannot explain. Their certainty starts to decay. What was choreographed to look like control becomes a disoriented shuffle, and someone must now take the blame for the failure of a performance that never begins. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Every whisper, every scheme, every script was rehearsed to perfection, and yet none of it lands. The defenses they didn't believe in turn out to be unbreachable. That unseen barrier makes them unravel. The real sting isn't in the blocked path. It's in the unaffected stance of the one they meant to weaken. The fact that nothing cracks, nothing folds, nothing spirals as planned, it shatters them. Soon they begin to question, not just their methods, but each other. The very plan that was meant to isolate becomes the reason for internal collapse. Silent chats turn tense. Trust erodes, not because of exposure, but because of failure. Every mask they wore to play their part begins to slide, and all the resentment they buried under strategy rises to the surface. They built a bonfire, but they're the ones choking on the smoke. The collapse isn't caused by defense. It's triggered by divine refusal. The act they planned never gets a stage, and the spotlight they hoped would shine on a downfall now exposes their own instability. The ones who gathered as a force now stand as fragments, unable to even make eye contact, without suspicion burning behind it. What was meant to be a takedown becomes a mirror, and not one of them is ready to face their own reflection. Shared contempt is not a foundation, it's borrowed time. Their connection was never forged in truth or loyalty, but in mutual resentment. Remove the shared target, and nothing of value remains. Their alignment depended on having someone to dismantle. Without that, they're strangers lost in a house they built together for destruction. It only takes one missed strike, one failed attempt, for everything to unravel. The alliance that once moved in unison now stumbles over itself. Their unity was never about trust. It was camouflage for deeper fractures. Behind the smiles and agreements were silenced judgments and buried jealousy. When the excuse to hate vanishes, the only thing left to confront is each other. And then come the doubts. Was someone too passive? Did someone leak what was meant to be concealed? Is anyone even invested in the cause anymore? The plan was supposed to break someone else, but now the cracks have found their way home. Every room becomes a trial, every message a potential betrayal. The heat they intended to direct outward curls back toward their own faces, branding each one with the truth they refuse to see. Their alliance, built on shallow rage, was never meant to last. That's the irony. They believed they were strong because they marched together, when in reality, they were only ever synchronized in spite. Now, with nothing left to attack, they see the hollowness behind their pact. There's no camaraderie, just resentment without an outlet. And once the target stands untouched, the question isn't who they despise, It's whether they can even tolerate themselves, and that answer becomes louder than any strategy they once believed in. They walk with the illusion of secrecy, not realizing they move beneath unseen observation. While they whisper in circles and weave intentions in shadow, a higher council has already reviewed the case. Yet, it's not you under inquiry. You're not the accused, you're the exempt. What surrounds you is not just favor, it's a spiritual contract, a protective seal inscribed in realms they don't believe in until it's too late. Every harmful gesture, every slander passed, like a note in darkness, is preserved, not for your vengeance, but for higher verdicts they never saw coming. Step beyond the screen, join and help light the way for others. Their drama plays out like theater, and they think they're writing the script, but every scene they perform is already being recorded beyond their stage. They thought the noise they made shaped your reality, when in truth, it's just collecting in a vault of evidence. The consequences are triggered not by your defense, but by their trespass. They violate territory never meant for their hands, stepping beyond moral error and into forbidden ground. The fallout is automatic, not by retaliation, but by order. They begin to sense something isn't aligning. Plans backfire, trust thins, and accusations once pointed outward now turn inward. The coordination cracks because something greater than their influence is already dismantling it. They spoke in confidence, and now even their allies speak in doubt. Not because you exposed them, but because what they stirred up has turned on them. The shift isn't loud, it's not explosive, it's surgical. What was intended as defamation becomes self-exposure. And as the silence grows, so does the clarity. They were never steering the outcome. The attempt to stain your name becomes the reason their own circle decays. The protection you carry isn't flashy, it's judicial, absolute, and unshakable. Where they assumed freedom to wound, they now face restrictions they can't undo. The judgment they aimed for you now mirrors back on them, and the silence they mistook for weakness becomes their strongest sentence. There are moves that look strategic, but are born from wounded pride, not purpose. When offense festers long enough, it dresses itself in justification and walks like authority. But what they call righteous anger is nothing more than bruised ego wearing borrowed robes. They assemble like they're divinely appointed, but never stop to ask whether what they're building has permission to stand. And because they act without approval, the collapse begins before the first strike lands. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They operate like executioners, but their blades hold no weight. They thought plotting made them powerful, but none of it was sanctioned. They step into roles too big for their spirit, and that misstep invites consequences. They aren't engaging in some noble correction. They're venting shadows dressed in concern. And those shadows don't carry the backing of anything greater than personal vendettas. Once they push past the unseen boundary, everything slips. Mistrust spreads like ink in water. Conversations twist. What began as unity becomes suspicion. They expected swift success, but all they receive is unrest. The unraveling is swift, not slow. Plans misalign, alliances scatter, and panic bubbles beneath the surface as the truth begins to expose its quiet authority. They assumed they'd get closure. What they get is exposure. The collapse is not punishment, it's protection. They don't lose because they're outmatched by you. They lose because they fight against what was never theirs to touch. And when the divine draws a line, no amount of determination can cross it. Their rage becomes their ruin, their confidence, their undoing. What they call purpose was nothing more than projection. The fallout isn't due to resistance, it's due to misalignment. And while they search for someone to hold accountable, the truth echoes back with sharp clarity. No matter how loud ego speaks, it still has no authority. There are some presences that do not need to argue or explain. They simply exist, and that alone disrupts everything built on illusion. Clarity, when unshakable, does not have to speak loudly. It illuminates without effort. And those living in self-denial feel it the most. They sense exposure in the calm, not because they are accused, but because truth stands near. That proximity becomes unbearable. It shakes their false narratives and strips their comfort, not because anyone attacked them, but because the contrast is too stark to ignore. In that light, hidden motives buckle. They squirm, not from confrontation, but from the reflection they cannot avoid. What they tried to mask becomes visible without a word. The more they try to distort the image, the more it sharpens. But since they cannot bend the truth, they attempt to fracture the one who holds it. They aim to fracture not a person, but what that person represents. Resilience that does not need applause, peace that does not seek validation, and still, the reflection holds. As frustration festers, the blame shifts. No longer focused outward, they begin pointing fingers inward. Discontent whispers into accusation. Their once aligned plans turn against their creators. What started as group certainty collapses into scattered tension, because the one thing they could not distort is still standing, untouched. That resilience is not fed by attention or noise, but by alignment. That is what burns them. The stability they cannot shake becomes the mirror they cannot turn away from. And while they scramble to rewrite the story, the one they tried to shatter never even lifted a hand. They were never facing a fight. They were facing their own reflection. And it is that confrontation they can never silence. Schemes built in whispers often unravel in echoes. They move thinking timing and secrecy will shield them, as if coordination can outmaneuver consequence. What they forget is that not every trap is untraceable. Some collapse on contact, and the moment they begin spinning their chaos, it starts folding in from within. Their strategy, crafted in quiet malice, lacks the one thing it needs most: authorization beyond their own ambition. Intent becomes interference the moment it reaches where it's not allowed. They think they're weaving webs, but the threads don't hold. The illusion of protection they build for themselves wears thin fast. Each time they pull tighter, the fabric tears wider. What they prepared to unleash unravels by design. The circle they trusted is full of fractures, disguised as friendship. And when the tension snaps, it starts from the inside. No outsider needs to expose them. Their own hands do it. What they called loyalty dissolves in panic. Voices start to tremble. One questions another's motives. Another distances to avoid the fallout. What was once unity turns into every man for himself, because the attack was never covered. The moment they acted without rightful cause, the structure caved. Now they're caught in the remnants of what they tried to orchestrate. They brace for backlash, but nothing comes from the one they targeted. That's what truly unravels them. The chaos is not fought. It is allowed to fall under its own weight. What they summoned becomes too much to hold. Every hidden plan, every smirk behind a false smile begins to leak. Not all at once, but in slow exposure. Drip by drip, the foundation sinks. They are drenched in what they thought they'd never face. Consequence born from the absence of restraint. What they tried to direct becomes a storm they cannot outrun, holding nothing but faulty defenses that fail on contact. And in the quiet center of it all, the one they sought to destroy remains untouched. Not because they fought harder, but because they never needed to fight at all. Some encounters aren't coincidental. They are orchestrated to surface what's buried. When someone enters their story carrying light, it doesn't ignite conflict, it reveals it. The point was never confrontation, but exposure. The test was subtle. Would they choose decency when envy whispers otherwise? Could they hold their ground when someone else walks in purpose? Would they celebrate another or decay in secret competition? They don't pass. Given a chance to elevate, they descend. Instead of taking inventory of their wounds, they lash out from them. Jealousy disguises itself as judgment. Insecurity becomes strategy. Their energy swerves into manipulation before they even notice the fork in the road. They don't realize the clock is ticking, not towards destruction, but toward clarity. And clarity comes quietly. Every word spoken in spite gets archived. Every scheme sows seeds in their own soil. The consequences aren't theatrical, they're surgical. Reputations they tried to maintain begin to glitch. Connections, once loyal, start to dry up. The very force they used to damage others becomes their undoing. And when things collapse, it isn't from shock, it's from pattern. They never realized the test wasn't for who they attacked, it was for who they chose to become. The truth isn't found in what they said publicly, but in how they behaved privately when they thought no one was watching. By the time their actions bear fruit, it's bitter. Accountability becomes a foreign concept. They scramble for excuses. They cast blame like confetti at a party no one stays for. The collective harm they tried to orchestrate fragments the very unity they thought made them strong, and nothing strikes them down. Nothing needs to. The absence of divine support is enough. What falls isn't cursed, it's simply unprotected. Grace steps back, and what's left can't stand. Some environments are built to wear you down, drip by drip, but when that fails, they turn up the pressure, hoping you'll fracture beneath silent warfare. They weaponize withdrawal, they cloak malice in polite tones, and they cast long shadows with short conversations. But what they miss is that some souls are not just protected, they're reinforced. No matter how methodically discomfort is applied, it doesn't sink. What's thrown at you doesn't settle, it scatters. Their plan was never to overpower. It was to exhaust, to flood your peace with invisible static. And when that doesn't work, the static starts to echo back. It builds inside them. The tension, the bitterness, the plotting. It begins to ferment. The damage they designed to leak into your life starts corroding their own. Sleepless nights, eroding relationships, fading confidence. What they exhale in secret returns in consequence. The environment they tried to taint becomes toxic only to them. You were never supposed to break. You were the control variable in their chaos, the constant, the unshaken, not immune by force, but by calibration. And while they believe you've escaped, what's really happened is they've been left to face their own reflection without the distraction of your reaction. That's where it turns. You weren't meant to retaliate, you were meant to remain. And your resilience isn't just protection, it's revelation. What doesn't harm you exposes what's harming them. It was never punishment, it was a reflection, redirected. What they built collapses, not because you struck back, but because no one can stand long in what was never meant to hold truth. There are those who reach beyond their limits, tampering with forces they barely comprehend. They're not just engaging in idle talk or petty rivalry. They sink into unfamiliar spiritual territory, driven by the illusion of control. They lace old symbols with trendy delusions, thinking they can command outcomes with intention alone. But what they mistake for authority is simply recklessness cloaked in ritual. They wander into realms that require permission, unaware that not all doors they open are meant to be shut again. What they believe is influence is intrusion. They trespass spiritual boundaries with rituals they cannot interpret, and in doing so, trigger reactions they're unequipped to manage. What starts as harmless curiosity becomes a spiral. Their efforts bounce back, disoriented and wild, latching on to their own energy. The more they try to alter your path through spiritual manipulation, the more their own path twists out of form. They lose track of what's real. Rest becomes rare. Anxiety follows them like a second shadow. The air around them grows heavy. Their intentions unravel into confusion, and still, they don't understand why. They thought they could summon and control, but in doing so, they summon judgment without knowing it. Protection wrapped around you like invisible iron, and every attempt to tamper only bruises the one who initiates it. The disturbance isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. What they hoped would cause damage reveals who was never authorized to act. Their grip on one another loosens. Paranoia creeps in. Someone must have said too much. Someone failed to chant correctly. Someone hesitated. But the truth is simpler. They stepped where they were forbidden. Now they sit in the wreckage of their own conjuring, drained and confused. They thought they were powerful, but they never had access. What they called awakening was trespass. What they called strategy was spiritual ignorance. And the one they aimed at, untouched. Because protection is not just presence, it's alignment, and that cannot be breached. This is not casual envy. It's not a passing resentment or a quiet insecurity tucked behind a smile. This is fixation that festers, an all-consuming preoccupation that leaves them restless and tangled. They are not annoyed by your success. They are haunted by your resilience. What eats at them is not what you have, but what you resist. Their tools don't work on you. Their games find no player. And that resistance triggers a rage deeper than jealousy. They are possessed, not inspired. Over time, your life becomes their measure. They track your peace like a rival competitor. They analyze your calm, your choices, your wins, not to understand, but to tear them down. What began as quiet irritation becomes obsession disguised as analysis. Their conversations orbit around your existence. Their energy pours into dissecting what they cannot control. It is no longer about disliking you. It's about needing to see you break to validate their own belief that no one can survive untouchable.